I want to start my story with a quote that kind of frames the story, and it's by the Jesuit priest Teilhard de Chardin, and it's, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we are spiritual beings having a human experience." Now, I've always loved this quote because as a human being, I'm always seeking some reason or some way to connect to my spiritual side. And as a spiritual being, I'm always looking at ways to deal with my humanness. So I have dabbled in everything. I've dabbled in Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, science of mind, metaphysics, Jungian philosophy, Kabbalah, fairies, Shakespeare. To my body, I have massaged it, rolfed it, poked needles in it, pumped it full of natural remedies. I've done neurobiofeedback, lucid dreaming therapy, talk therapy, magnet therapy, Tai Chi, yoga, LSD, someone yelled, marijuana. And what I thought I had come to was that we are spiritual beings and we're living stories. As my favorite teacher says, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. We're playing roles. So, of course, as all of you, I have many roles. I'm a woman, I'm a teacher, I'm a friend, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a granddaughter, I'm a hippie, I'm a punk rocker, too. I'm a liberal, I'm a manitoid, I'm Jewish, but I always say I was raised Jewish. I mean, I went to temple as a kid, I had a bat mitzvah, I dated Jewish boys, all of my best friends were Jewish, but as I grew older, I kind of separated myself from the religion. I'm not observant as a Jewish person, I'm not religious, but if any of you know, Judaism isn't just a religion, it's a culture. It's my family, and I love my immediate family. Now, a lot of my family on my mother's side live in Israel, and they, like me, are secular Jews, and we, like many Jewish people I know, have had a lot of relatives, close relatives, that were killed in the Holocaust. Now, growing up, I never, ever heard the stories because that was kind of the thing. Nobody wanted to talk about it. I did know that my grandmother and grandfather had really heavy Yiddish accents. They were from a small shtetl or town in Poland called Kineshit. Now, my grandmother always told the same story. So, channel, Minnie, Mac. Your grandfather Louis lived down the street from me, and he used to come into our hardware store and flirt shamelessly with me, Nancy. He thought I was beautiful. All the boys thought I was beautiful. I was very popular. But Louis won my grandmother's heart, and in 1922 they were married. Now, soon after, my grandfather came over to the United States because things were already getting scary for Jewish people in Poland, even back then. And my grandmother had to wait 5 years before she could come here. And finally, after letter writing and a lot of homesickness, my grandmother joined my grandfather. Now, they never talked about how difficult it was to leave their family, their culture, their language, their friends to come here. What I also didn't know growing up is that my grandfather had 9 brothers and sisters, and both parents and all but one sister were murdered by the Nazis. Some of them were buried alive. What I also didn't know growing up is that my grandfather had such bad guilt and depression from surviving that he had to have regular shock treatments. He died when I was in 6th grade of a heart attack. I'm pretty sure he died of a broken heart. My grandmother lived to be 88, and I loved her dearly. She never talked about her loss. She and 2 of her sisters were able to leave Poland before the war. But her brother Avremel was captured by the Nazis, and because he would not give the names of his Jewish neighbors, he had his tongue cut out and was beaten and bled to death. Her sister and mother were both killed in the extermination camp Treblinka, but she never talked about this. She did, however, love to reminisce about Kinnishon and all the boys. Now, after she died, my mother made it her mission to find our relatives in Israel and to bring us together and to find the stories of the Holocaust. And in 1995, she and my stepfather took our entire family to Israel. And I loved Israel, and I love my family. But still, when I returned, I didn't feel connected. I didn't feel connected to the stories, especially the stories of the Holocaust, with my family. This was not my story. And so I would disassociate anytime I would hear any of the stories. So when my mother in 2010 offered to pay for my sister and I to go on a Holocaust journey through Poland with 25 of our Israeli relatives, I got to tell you, I wasn't all that excited. You know, I mean, who in the world would want to walk into all that pain? It took a while before I decided I wanted to go. Now, the journey was a journey through Poland to see where my family had lived and where they were eventually killed, to see the history of Judaism in Poland and the destruction of Judaism in Poland. The home of my family, the home of 3 million Jews. Now, I don't know, the number varies, but I think it's 80,000 Jews. And the theme of our trip was same ground, same sky, different time. Now, my sister met, when my sister and I met our family in Warsaw, and all of us were either directly from my grandmother's house, Greenspan, or her neighbor and cousin's house, Pitluck. And we started and we visited memorials, concentration camps, historical sites. And early in the trip, we stopped at an abandoned train station in the town Itzbika, where one of our cousins thought her grandmother had been killed. And we were told that it was here that they packed Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto into these cars and brought them to the station. And they covered the bottom of the cars with this white powder called quicklime. Now, quicklime, when in contact with the human flesh, burns it. So the occupants of these cars were literally burned to death, the flesh eaten from their bones. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear a story like that, I want to disassociate. And let me tell you something. When I was standing there, I wanted to run. I mean, this was the very thing I'd been running from my whole life. But I had nowhere to go. I was right there. This is what the trip meant. Same ground, same sky, different time. Now, as we got closer to Kinnishon, we became closer as a family. And about halfway through the trip, we stopped in Krakow. And it was the Sabbath, now Shabbos. It's a time to let down from the week, to come together as a family, to celebrate our family together. And it was probably the first time in my life that I really understood the meaning of Sabbath. Because as a family, we broke bread, we drank wine, we told stories. And it was here that I was able to imagine what it might have been like to celebrate Sabbath together with this family. Again, the same ground, same sky, different time. Now, there were about 1,500, the numbers vary, but 1,500 concentration camps during World War II. And 6 of them were extermination camps. And Auschwitz and Birkenau were the largest of the Nazi killing camps. I think Auschwitz at its height was killing probably 12,000 people a day. So it's a museum now, and it's profound. with its glass cases full of belongings never returned, eyeglasses, shoes, suitcases, and there's documents and pictures everywhere. Now, to me, this was the most horrific part of the story, was the keeping track. The Nazis documented everything. And it was here that I realized that only a small percentage of these monsters were caught and punished. Now, how could this be, I was thinking. And the pain was really intense. I just didn't understand. Excuse me. There's no way to describe what it's like to walk in Birkenau. The barbed wire fences, the barracks where an inhumane amount of people slept, the showers, the ovens. And as a tour, we stood in front of these holes that were toilets, we were told. And the prisoners had a very short amount of time to sit and relieve themselves with their dysentery and disease. And their incentive was, if they were caught in the field soiling themselves, they would either be shot or they would have to stand all night in a standing cell. So our tour guide instructed us to touch everything. And so I touched one, and it was as if an electric shock went through me. As if for a split second, I went back to that moment. And I know that 6 to 8 million people were murdered, but in that moment, they were my family, and it was my story, and I was connected, and it was painful. Finally, we get to Kinnashin, and the entire bus screams when we see the sign, because it was here that we had an opportunity to see where my grandmother had grown up, the place she cherished and missed so much. So we all just get out of the bus, and we touch the ground, and the house wasn't there anymore. It was a different house, but the fence was still there. And we're touching the fence, and we're hugging, and we're laughing, and we're reminiscing. And it was here that I imagined what it was like to see my grandmother and her family, her brothers and sisters, her uncles and aunts, her mother and father, all working and living and lighting candles and fighting and having a life. And it was here at this fence, the fence that she and I both touched, that I imagined her lingering for just one more moment as she said goodnight to my grandfather. Now, after this, we had one more event before we went home. We were all taken to a neighboring village in Tikashin. It was really close. And we went into the town square, and we acted out this little skit that our tour guide had given us. And then he played some Israeli music, and without provocation, as a family, we came together and we danced and we sang and we clapped, and there were some people around and they were looking at us weird, but we didn't care. We were having so much fun loving each other and coming together. And then our tour guide yelled, "Stop! Everybody get in the bus and do not speak." Now we trusted him. So we followed his orders, and we got on the bus, and we were taken to this huge forest. These trees were unbelievable. And we were told to get out and march single file and do not speak. Now, we knew by this point it was some sort of a reenactment, but it was scary. And we followed his orders, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked under these trees in this little path. And finally, we got to the end, and it was a memorial for the slaughter at Tikashin. Now, something the Nazis did is that they gathered people into the town square for a false celebration, and that's what they did here. And they marched them to these remote areas where there were giant graves, they were holes at that time, and everybody had to stand and take all their clothes off, and they were mowed down by machine guns. Now, many of them fell into the graves while still alive, like my grandfather's a couple brothers and sisters. And they put sand over it and bulldozed over it. And neighboring villages reported hearing cries and moans for days after. And I was standing there looking around, and I had so much pain and anger at all of the ugliness and the hate in the world. I just didn't understand it. And then I took a moment and I looked up at these trees, these magnificent, non-judgmental trees that had been here and been witness to this horrible event. And I realized, same ground, same sky, but all of a sudden it was crazy. The time was now, and we were all one. The past, the present, the murderers, the murdered. And I looked at my beautiful human family that I had grown to love. And I stopped because I wanted to run. I wanted to stop the feelings. And I didn't. I stood there and I felt the breeze on my face, and I could hear my grandparents' voices, and I could hear all the people that had lived and died here. And I knew that by standing still and not running, I was honoring them and their stories. That the horrible, horrible things that happen and continue to happen in our world, that I realized if I was present, that this is what it means to be a spiritual being living a human experience. That we get to feel the pain, and we get to feel love, and we get to touch, and we get to smell, and we get to see, and we get to love, and we get to take action. And most of all, we get to tell the stories. We must tell the stories because they are our guides. Thank you so much for letting me share this story.